Good morning, Michael. How are you this morning?
Well, good morning, Jenny. How are you?
I am okay, but I have to say, so I'm kind of ready to fall back.
Well, you got one more week, I guess.
I know, but I'm telling you, I think the reason I'm late in the morning is because I keep waiting for the sun to come out to go out and do farm chores. So I'm like, by the time the sun finally comes up and I'm ready to go out and do farm chores, it's like 12,
Yeah.
and it's like, but I've missed everything in the morning.
Yeah. It's funny.
Well, I've got an excuse for everything. You want to pump me on that?
No?
Okay, because I do. I mean, there's an excuse for everything.
Yeah. Well, I was going to tell you, I have had some questions on my email from people on money and crypto and some of that stuff. So I will encourage anyone else, if you've got any questions or anything, I'm happy to talk to you about it, educate you, give you any advice I can, tell you what I'm doing, whatever we need to.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that. But and I do want to point out we have watchers on Rumble again this morning, and I do have the chat up. So if you've got any questions you want to ask Dr. Harrell, you can do it because I've got the messages right here. And then you can also, if you're on Facebook, you can also ask questions in our stream on Facebook, and we'll see them, and we're happy to answer any questions you have. So thanks for bringing that up. And I'm super happy about our guest for today.
Well, I am too, and I think people, this is just going to be another impact, another just kind of stack on top of how bad education standards are, how bad mathematics are, how bad all those things are when it comes to, especially like our primary education and things like that. I mean, it's something that I had no idea about until I ran for school board. Then I really started looking at all the numbers and supposedly really good districts. I mean, it is scary just how far off the wagon we've fallen, especially I don't know and Sandy will have a much better, take on an explanation. I don't know if it's just the standards or if it's the actual composition of the curriculum or kind of, or just the new teaching methods or, whatever.
Well, let's bring Dr. Harrell in and talk to her this morning and ask her. Good morning, Sandy. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
She's not in yet.
We'll do what? What happened?
She's not in yet on my screen.
Oh, well, you're a little laggy this morning.
Oh, well.
Yeah, you look like you might be. You're a little laggy. I don't know why. Maybe it'll catch up. We'll see. So I just wanted to tell everybody about my friend Sandy Harrell. So Sandy, you and I have known each other for how many years?
A long time, since the Common Core days, way back when.
So Sandy was a Common Core fighter with us back in the day. And it's going to be really kind of important for you guys to understand that fact, because when we talk about standards here in a second, you'll know that not only does she have a math background, but she has the Common Core background too there that, we can kind of build off. But first of all, before we do anything, I have to say, congratulations, Dr. Harrell.
Thank you. I just defended my dissertation on Friday the 13th, which was very appropriate. Yeah. And so we're still waiting on the ink to dry and some paperwork to go back and forth. But the defense is over and I'll be graduating in December. So yeah.
I am so...
Yeah, good for you. Congratulations.
Thank you. I started on February 5th of 2021. So went to school and taught the whole time over summers and over breaks and the whole thing nonstop. So yeah, and it's a really good program though. It's through Southern Nazarene, and the dissertation process is built in with the coursework. So they do them simultaneously, overlapping and interactively.
Okay.
So it's a really cool way to go through the material while you're going through your dissertation process as well. So.
Well, that is kind of nice. But yes. I mean, I knew you had been doing it for a long time. And I mean, seriously, Sandy, Dr. Harrell, way to go. I mean, way to really buckle down and get that done. I just think that's so awesome. And good for you. Dang it.
Thank you. There were moments I was not sure that it was going to be completed. There were times of struggle, many times of struggle. Yeah. But yes, it's kind of front end loaded. So you kind of get to the point where you're like, okay, I've done all this and I'm not quitting because I've done all this. Yeah. So the only choice is to keep going through. So
yeah, I kind of did that with my master's, or actually my original degree, my bachelor's degree, because I'd been so long out of school before I did my degree that I wanted to make sure I could actually do chemistry because I was a terrible high school student. So I put all of that at the beginning just to make sure I could actually do it before I went on.
Yes.
And I barely got it by the skin of my teeth, but I got it. So I went on. Well, hey, let's I'm going to kind of throw it to you. What do you want to talk about first? Do you want to talk about what's going on with math standards right now? Do you want to, what do you want to talk about?
We can start with the math. That would be fine. Like I said, the standards for math were actually approved and adopted legally by the legislature last session. I believe it was mid-April. So the legislature has to approve the standards that are given to them. And it's basically, they've approved the same thing that we did have. That's not a good thing. So because we went back and forth with Common Core, and then when we outlawed Common Core in 2014, we put PASS back in place until we could get something else. And so we were going back to the PASS, and a lot of people frowned upon that, but I thought PASS was okay. And at one point it was deemed by, the grand poobahs to be college and career ready. So, but then suddenly they became, out of favor with, the new things that were coming along the line. And it's kind of sad to think that there are actually trends and fad and fashion in curriculum and standards, but there are buzzwords that come and go, just like with everything else. But to me, that's sad because this pertains to our kids, and this pertains to their foundation, and this pertains to their education. So that should not be something that comes and goes with, capri pants. There's something that should be solid, and something that should be proven that stays in place. So anyway, those were approved, but now the reason why this is all coming back up is because now we adopt the books to go with the standards. So what happens is the curriculum committee from the State Department of Oklahoma, and Kendra Wesson is the chair of that committee. They get to choose which ones we get to pick from. So Oklahoma is a state where districts get to choose their own. There are some states where they choose one book for the entire state, and Texas is one of those. So of course, if you're marketing your textbooks, where are you going to look? Well, you're not going to come running to Garvin County to sell 40 books. You're going to go to Texas, where you can try to compete and cover, their whole state. You want to be the one that they pick for their whole state. But that's not how we work here in Oklahoma. And I think that's fantastic. Every district should get to choose. It's local taxpayers.
If we say we believe in local control,
exactly.
Isn't that local control?
Yes. And again, that's where the tax base comes from. So, to me, the curriculum is the foundation of the school. So if you're paying for the school, then the curriculum should not be forced upon you. You're the purchaser, you're the buyer, you're the investor, and you're also the parents, and you're the local community. So, you're funding this. So I think to be able to choose the curriculum, to have that autonomy is crucial. So we're fortunate in Oklahoma that each district does get to choose. So different districts handle it different ways depending on the size of the district. Some of them have a textbook committee, some of them have curriculum committees, and they'll go decide what the district wants, or sometimes they'll present choices and bring those in. The teacher involvement totally depends on the district. Some districts allow teachers to have a big voice. Some districts, again, usually it depends on size. The smaller districts, the teachers report having more autonomy, which makes sense because you're a smaller district. A lot of times in our smaller schools, the teachers are the curriculum coordinators. So we don't have the big administrative bloat like some of the larger districts do. So we'll get to choose a textbook based on what the textbook committee decides we can pick from. So of everything that's published, they kind of narrow down what they think we get to choose from. So that brings me to, there was an article that was published in the Daily Oklahoman, and it was October 25th, so this was pretty recent. And we had some textbook companies that apparently withdrew from consideration here in Oklahoma. And the reason that they did that, it sounds somewhat political. I know that's shocking, but since education and curriculum and everything else has become so political, these textbook companies were withdrawing because of our state perceived stance on library books and SEL, and the fact that there's information that we may or may not want in front of our kids. I mean, oh my goodness, we have some gatekeepers that think maybe we need to be checking for levels of appropriateness. Crazy talk.
I know.
I mean, almost like
Who really cares about kids? I can't figure that out.
I've spent a lot of time at libraries the last 3 years. I can tell you, a lot of time at libraries. And in the kids section, there's not pornography, there's not magazines, there's not Playboy and Hustler in the kids section of the public libraries. So to me, there is some kind of wisdom and guidance and structure somewhere to think not everything belongs in front of the eyes of children. Right. There's got to be a line somewhere. But in this article, they quote your friend and mine, Mr. Levi Patrick, which that raises suspicion not because of him, but simply because we're not asking people in the job now. They intentionally went back to find someone who was previously in the job before to get their opinion. And I thought, well, okay, and that's fine. His opinion that's fine. His opinion. But there are people that are doing this job right now. And so that kind of just made me, give a little bit of a side eye when we're not thinking about the people who are doing this job now. We went back to someone who they know what they're going to say. But anyway, it says that there are just fewer opportunities for schools and teachers to choose from. 17 companies initially asked to be considered in this year's math textbooks adoption process, according to the records of the State Department of Education of Oklahoma. 8 withdrew, and 1 company was removed for not submitting a printed sample product. So 8 vendors are left. And then it goes on to say, of those 8 vendors, one of them, McGraw-Hill, faces a complaint from the conservative parent group Moms for Liberty. The group's Tulsa County chapter urged the state textbook committee to reject the company's bid over, and then they bring the word alleged. They never bring the word alleged when they're talking about their stuff, on their side, but when it's our side, it's all alleged. They're alleged, sorry, there's a fly in my house now, of social emotional learning in its products. So they're bringing in social emotional learning into math. So a lot of times when you hear the textbook controversies and the library book controversies, you might think, oh, those math teachers don't have to work. Oh, yes, we do. And it's in the strangest ways. So they're talking about the social emotional components being in these textbooks. And so they don't want those books to be considered. I've always wondered, just me, why we don't do more of creating our own materials. If we're going to make our standards and then we have to go hunt for materials to make sure they're aligned, we have a few and then some competent people in the state of Oklahoma. We have universities in the state of Oklahoma. So I've always wondered why we don't actually create more of our own content rather than trying to go out and buy from other people and try to make a square peg fit in a round hole. You're trying to make your content match our standards. Well, I wonder. And then 2, with SEL, the social emotional learning, I think there's another piece to this puzzle, a couple, in fact. When I look at, I've got a few pieces here in front of me, our long-term goals for all students, and this is from, again, the State Department website, and it shows their long-term plan of expected percent of proficiency, and it's broken down by race for each grade. So it shows year to year to year what is expected of students based on, it says at the top of the list, students with disabilities, economically disadvantaged, Black, Hispanic, Native American, Asian, Pacific Islander, 2 or more races, and white. So depending on how you're considered, which I don't know that I've ever met anybody that's just one thing. I mean, so when you get the 20, I've never done 23andMe, but when you do, you get a pie chart, you don't get a circle. And so it's, it's all spliced out for different components. So I'm not sure where they're doing the math to see, well, if you're 2/3 this and you're 1/10 that and you're 2/4, well, then your expected improvement would be, and I'm sure there's someone who would love to, put those numbers in the magic Wonka machine and see what comes out. But this to me, I'm not sure how we are even going to make sure we're doing this or benchmarking or checking, or as a teacher, I'm like, okay, let me look at my kids. When you look at our stats, we have a high percentage of Native American students in a lot of our schools. But yet when you look at them, are you telling me I'm supposed to be able to look at my students in front of me and go, well, yeah, you're this and you're, oh my goodness.
But that sounds racist though.
That's what makes my stomach hurt. I'm like, oh, why? Anyway, my thinking is that this could be in some way, because we have to comply with federal mandate. And so my thinking is that there is a federal requirement somewhere that causes us to have to do this, but nevertheless, it's embarrassing to me that this is on our State Department of Oklahoma website. But I'm sure our hand is being forced is what I'm getting at. But at the top of that page, there's a very interesting paragraph. It says long-term goals for proficiency of all students as detailed in tables 18 through 20. As a reminder, Oklahoma has the long-term goal of at least 50% of students scoring proficient by 2032.
50%. Long-term,
so
50%.
Long-term goal is for half of our students to be proficient. It says so right
Does
there.
anybody remember back to when W put in place his ESEA and he said that 92% of all students would be proficient in math and English? And as a matter of fact, that's why we were locked down into all kinds of different regulations. And I mean, that you and I have talked about over the years. And so now we've gone from, 92 is too high to 50.
Yeah, no child left behind, but apparently only 50 are moving forward. So I don't know. I don't, okay. But wait, there's more. Okay. So
no,
then
stop.
Okay. So it says the proficiency goal. This proficiency goal would place Oklahoma in the top 5 to 10% of all states in the country with comparable college and career readiness standards.
Well, oh my gosh. Has anybody seen the movie Idiocracy?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and if we can, Sandy, Dr. Harrell.
Oh my gosh, Sandy, that's horrifying.
Yeah, can we back up for just a second? Can you tell everybody, where do these standards come from? Is it like a combination of state or federal, or is it just committees of who or what or how? Just how do we get these standards in the first place?
There are standards committees, and the Oklahoma Academic Standards for Math are, drawn up by the committees. Several years ago, I attempted to get on a committee, and at that point, I had several years of teaching experience in private school, public school, different age groups, different subjects, and never even got a call back. Had a master's in curriculum. And I thought maybe I have something to offer. I think that would be interesting to have a seat at the table. Never got a call back. And because I found out through experience, the people in charge of these committees pick the people on the committees who are of like mind. And so when the agenda is top down in place, you're going to pick the people that are going to write what you want. And so when I was reading that paragraph at the top, and this really falls in line with when I have asked the State Department of Education different questions, and to say you've asked the State Department every time there's an administrative change, it is a shift change.
Yeah.
So when you call and ask the State Department something, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, 4 years ago, 6 days ago, you're going to get different answers depending on, kind of who's in charge and where their direction is overall. But they kept bragging about these standards. And if you listen, it says it puts us in the top 5 to 10% of all the states in the country. So we're patting ourselves on the back for our standards and hoping half our kids can do them. I can't get there. I mean, you're telling me that these standards are so great that only half of our kids are going to be able to do them. Yet all of them, well, I say all, nearly all, very few kids are retained. They will be moving forward. So let's just say we meet our grand goal. Okay, 50% of the kids can pass. So let's just pick a grade. 50% of fifth graders can pass. They're all going on to sixth grade. 50% of those sixth graders pass. I wonder if it's the same 50% or is it a different 50%? I don't know.
Well, but think about the attrition of that, right?
Yes. Yes.
50 of 50 of 50 of 50.
Right. Right. And to me, I'm thinking, and again, in our assessment. So again, I think there are so many broken pieces and they're trying to make something productive with broken pieces. Our standards, as I stated, not great, but then the way that we assess them, I think we're looking at a funhouse mirror and trying to get an accurate description. I mean, our standards are not great. Our assessment comes from somewhere else, which again, to meet federal mandate, we probably can't create a lot of this, which I think is sad. But at what point are we spending dollars chasing dimes? We're doing all of these things that may not be best for our kids to get federal money, and it's sad because it's hurting our kids.
Well, and how much of the budget, the Oklahoma education budget, is federal money?
Right. And that is an excellent question. I know for the state budget, it's about 51%. So when people are saying we're not funding education,
see, what I've read is like 12%.
Right. It kind of depends on how you look at it. It's this money, allotted of this money, allotted of this money. So sure. They can, with data and statistics, you can craft them and still be honest. But yeah, there's approximately roughly half of the state budget goes to education. So when they say underfunded, okay, well, how much money is it going to take? And how much, so when people say evaluate federal programs to see what we're getting from them, I think that's fantastic because they're basically holding a financial gun to our head. They're trying to legislate what kind of bathrooms we have, or you won't get your money. You got to do this in the cafeteria. You've never seen regulations like cafeteria regulations. Oh my gosh, don't give an extra green bean or you won't get your funding. I mean, it's ridiculous. So when someone says we need to evaluate what is entailed, what strings are attached, well, the first thing you hear is kids won't get to eat lunch. No, but that's how they're going to spin it. And that's how they're going to say it. You have to evaluate what guidelines am I having to meet? What mandates are they putting on me in exchange for the money? Because the money ain't free. I mean, you're going to have to jump through the hoops and meet their requirements or you don't get it. And that's how the federal government pushes their way, is that you have to meet these guidelines or you're not going to get your funding.
Well, so I want to back up for a second. So when you and I met during the Common Core debacle, you were very concerned that the math standards in Common Core were just they weren't rigorous enough to be able, and they weren't developmentally appropriate. Right. That was a huge problem with the standards that so many people said was they weren't just developmentally appropriate. So that was when Dr. Barisi had been voted out of office and Joy Hoffmeister was coming in, and Rope had been very engaged in the Common Core fight. And and Joy had promised us that we would be able to have some input into the standards. So we actually went out and got really good math people who had been kicked off or who had left the Common Core Standards Board because they were so mad about the Common Core math standards. And they actually submitted information to the state on our behalf through us about the Common Core math standards. And it was unbelievable. I think that was the first time my eyes were opened to how liberal this state has become and how many liberals were actually in education pushing these progressive kinds of standards, because we were basically thrown off of Twitter just because you couldn't say anything on Twitter without them coming in and saying these horrible things. They called me out as a parent and singled out my kids. I mean, it was the most ridiculous thing I have ever seen over math standards. Why would these people lose their junk over math standards?
Right. And, I'm one of those weirdos where I feel like when there are different ideas at the table, we should discuss them, not eliminate them. Call me crazy. I'm just that old. I mean, if you can't come back with your ideas and you have to just shut me up, that makes me wonder about the quality of your ideas. I mean, because I'm not, nobody's right all the time, but to me, I'm sorry, I thought that's what we were teaching kids in education, to think. Education is to teach. Like I said, I'm elder than Moses, but we aren't teaching kids to think anymore. We're just teaching them to just take it and absorb and do. And I know, again, well, we've already established I'm a loon bird, but I think sometimes it's the people causing the problem that peddle the cure. And
yes.
just a theory. So I think with the SEL coming into math, I don't think I'm the first person to use this term, but to me, academic trauma, because when we keep day after day, year after year, requiring kids to come to school where they're miserable. And I'm thinking, okay, every day kids are not ready for what they're being taught. They're not just thinking, and their age is just not developmentally there for some of the things that we're teaching them. And when I'm told that only 50% of them are supposed to understand what's going on, how can I think any differently? And so when they're coming to school every day, defeated, coming to school every day, day after day, and you don't need someone to tell you you're struggling, And if you're a kid and you don't get it day after day, no one has to come up and tell you, you're not good at math. You're already thinking it. So we have these kids who are convinced, I can't do this. I'm not a math person. We hear that all the time. And then we try to bring in the social emotional learning to make them feel better about it. Well, how about we don't cause it in the first place? I mean,
well, and I was going to interrupt and say, because we've got quite a few listeners, the watchers this morning, and I wanted to point out this because it's hard for people to understand. Regular parents don't really get, us kind of, educational nerds, we get the standards and so the standards are first, and then the curriculum comes on the top of that, and then you have to pick books that go with the curriculum. And before I say what I wanted to say, I want to point out a comment that you made about the book review process.
Mm-hmm. Yes, a couple of people asked me if I wanted to be on the textbook committee, and these were people, I don't know if they know each other, but they approached me separately on 2 different occasions if I would be interested in being on the textbook committee. And my response was, I'm pretty sure I can't find a good book for bad standards. And if it comes to, efforts of futility, I already have one in teaching. I love my kids and they're great, but sometimes, days in the middle school, you just sit back and wonder at God's creation. It's no 2 days are the same, and I love my job. But I don't know that you could find a good way to say what's in our standards. And so to me, until that gets fixed, you can purchase any book you want. But when you're looking at what you're having to teach, I don't know that there's a good way to do that when it's not appropriate to begin with. And again, when you're looking at, I hate to say it, do the math. When you're looking at your kids and only half of them mastered what they were supposed to do last year, math builds so much on itself. What are you building on if only half of them were proficient in last year's? However, when you go on the State Department website and look for district by like their report card grades, it'll say, like, for example, one district said 83% of the kids were ready to go on to the next grade. And I thought, oh, well, that sounds fantastic. I want to see their test scores. Yeah, they were just as bad as everybody else's. So I don't see how we're driving this data. But then you're going to tell me there's nothing wrong with the test. Okay, well, if they're ready to go on to the next grade, then their test scores should be close to that. And, back in the day, our test assessment and these old things that we use called report cards, there used to be a little bit of alignment with the information. And so if a kid did such and such on their report card and you looked at their state test, and you could kind of say, oh yeah, that kind of matches up, to the 100 assignments they've done in my class this year. But since we have changed everything, the standards, the assessments, and everything, nothing matches. Absolutely nothing. Because you can have districts where very few kids actually fail report card wise. So if you're doing, let's just say, 8th grade math, well, you've taught 8th grade math and the kids have been successful. But on their state test scores, it's going to show that they're a 30%. The difference is way off. It's not a little bit off. It is way off.
Well, and I wanted to point out something too for people who are listening. So it's hard for people to understand, what does that mean that math standards are not developmentally appropriate? And I think the easiest way to do it is to explain what happened to my youngest son, who was a first grader at the time that we were pushing Common Core into public schools. And so my kid, and I will preface it by saying this, he had dysgraphia. but nobody knew that. I only figured that out because actually, believe it or not, Joy Hoffmeister, when I called her and said, hey, this is going on, she told me what it was. And once we figured out how to fix it, he went on and never had another problem. But what would happen in first grade was that he would bring home a worksheet that was supposed to be homework, and it would just be, numbers and like counting numbers. Then in a couple of weeks, just single addition would come home. A worksheet with single addition would come home. And I was having obviously a horrible time getting him through because he was seeing his numbers backwards. Dysgraphia is the same, almost the same kind of thing as, what do you call it in reading when you see words backwards?
Like dyslexia?
Thank you. So dysgraphia is basically the same thing in math that dyslexia is for English. So he was having a hard time anyway, but that wasn't even I guess that was kind of the point, because they just kept going on. So every test he'd bring back, he was getting worse and worse grades because he knew less. And yet they were still going on. In about 6 weeks. Now, all of a sudden, they were adding multiple numbers together. In about 5 weeks, they were subtracting numbers. It just kept going on and on. And my son kept getting further and further and further behind. And when I went to the teacher, she would say, well, it's this Common Core stuff. And I'm like, well, but see, he's a kid in your class, and he can't just know nothing by the time he gets out. And that, honestly, that after that last kid, I was like, no more public school for me. We're all homeschooling. And now he does. He's not a mathematician, but I have an older kid who is a mathematician.
Wow.
So, hey there.
Right.
But it definitely was developmentally not appropriate for him. And it was moving so fast that the teacher couldn't stop and say, hey, Jenni, Sam's having a problem here. We need to figure out what that was. And so he was just going to go on. And just like you said, Sandy, math spirals. It's a stair step. So where would that kid have been had we left him in public school?
Right. Miserable. And it kind of depends again, district to district on the importance they put on that state assessment. Some teachers and some districts really look at those for some evidence. And I'm not a member of a whole lot of Facebook groups, but just a couple. And every year it's very sad to me to see these teachers express the fact that they absolutely feel devastated when they get their state test scores back. And sometimes they're new teachers, and as teachers, we it's not accountability that we are not wanting. That's not what we're pushing back on. But can we be fair?
Right.
I'm 5 feet tall. You can judge me all day long on dunking a basketball, and you're going to be severely disappointed. Now, I'm not going to be, because I'm not going to care, because I know I'm 5 feet tall. I'm like, why am I going to waste my energy on that? But that's what we're doing to our kids. And I feel like there's no playing to your strengths. Now, when we were talking a while ago about the shifting, I was thinking about this while you were talking. In the past skills, which we previously had, there was some overlap in the skills. So you would get this in 6th grade, maybe, or you would get, a little bit more of it in 7th. We'd come back and say, okay, now this is what we did in 6th, and we would expand it a little bit further. And then there was some overlap. So there was a Venn diagram kind of thing, if you want to think about it that way, with a little bit of overlap. But then for some whatever reason, when we went to Oklahoma Academic Standards, we just figured every kid is going to know everything when they come to the next grade. And so there's no need to have any overlap. And that we have found to not be the case, particularly
well, and I should say that the Oklahoma Academic Standards were basically, we were told by all of the former Common Core bigwigs, we were told that we asked you to look at our standards, that they were basically Common Core light.
There are some strands, common strands in there, I will say. And again, I'm looking at this from an educator point of view, in that I'm, again, older than Methuselah. So I was taught that you teach different methods and different things in different ways, because not all kids are going to understand the same thing. So some of them do understand like the pictorials and the, the illustrating and the modeling and all that stuff. But some kids that are more mathematically geared just get the numbers and they get it. But to me, and that was one of my main concerns with Common Core and the Oklahoma Academic Standards, is that the Common Core wanted them to explain and write and words and da 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 da. I mean, if you've met teenagers lately, some of them don't give a flip. I mean, and the way that I related it to them, I said, I can't explain to you every aspect of turning on that light switch and the light comes out the bulb, but I'm still going to flip the switch. I can explain to you, how my car goes down the road, but I'm still not walking. I'm still going to get in the car and I'm going to go. So, I mean, every single one of us are different. And I feel like what we have done with Common Core and a little bit with the Oklahoma Academic Standards is we've really pigeonholed and we've really said, this is the only way to learn how to do this and to show that you understand it. And when we start assessing certain ways, making you draw a picture, making you do an illustration, that goes against everything we were ever taught in education. And I think we've gotten away from, because our old test would say, okay, you solve this problem and you pick the answer, but it wouldn't require a methodology. And I think we've steered away from that. So I've had some kids in my class who work in, shops with their dads and grandpas, and they work on motors and engines. They understood circles in terms of tires. They understood diameter. They understood circumference. All those numbers on the outside of the tire, they actually mean something. And so you could use that strategy with those kids to get them to understand. Well, if you don't have that background, you're not going to use that same strategy. Yeah. So, right. But still, nevertheless, if the assessment is geared toward that skill, it should be such that all kids can get it right if they know how to do it, if you're not requiring a certain method. Because as a teacher, that's part of the art and science of teaching, is reaching your kids in a way that they can get it. And as we are still, and I say we, that would be the veteran teachers, we are still striving to do that, knowing the assessment is going to pick one way. And if your kids don't know that one way, they're going to miss it.
Wow, that's a really good point. Yeah, say that one more time, reiterate that.
Well, I feel like, for example, like in the standards, it'll say, determine, do it this way, or it will say not limited to the standard algorithm. And they say standard algorithm almost with a, well, for some kids, that standard algorithm is repeatable. And it's something they can take and they can say, well, if this worked for this rectangle looks different, but I can still use that strategy. I don't need to chop it up in squares. I don't need to make the lines for all the units. I don't need to count 10 rows of 4. I know this is 10 and this is 4. And I know 10 groups of 4 and 4 groups of 10 is 40. But our assessment just pigeonholes. And also on our assessment, we have multiple part questions. And if you're assessing something, if you're assessing area, you may not want integers and fractions and decimals on there. If you want to know if they can do area, you ask them about area and nothing else. Then you look at the value. That's a good point. You look at the value of that question and you can tell, oh, they can do it or they can't. But we get these complicated questions that they're wordy, which for our special education kids, giving them wordy questions is the worst thing you can do. But then there are so many variables. So again, I don't look at the data because I'm like, oh, you missed question 17, which had 5 different components. So which one do you not know? I don't know. So we were taught to, if you're going to truly assess something, it should be in isolation and all other factors removed. And that's not happening.
Well, and let's talk about this too. So I remember one time when we were fighting Common Core and we went to St. Louis for we used to have a group of educators that would meet in St. Louis in January of every year, and we would go. And I met a guy named Ken Hertzler, and he was a teacher. He was in Texas now, but he used to be in Oklahoma, and he was a math teacher in Oklahoma City Public Schools. And you can actually go back and verify what he said. And I've got him on video on our YouTube channel if you want to go look him up. But he was a math teacher, and he said that basically what he did that changed the way kids learned math and caused the scores to just go up like crazy was to do the old way of doing it, which was when they came in the morning, they would sit down and they would do a multiplication, addition, subtraction, division drill. Right. And so you'd have 60 seconds to do this many problems, and and then they would start off doing their lesson for the day. And if kids weren't getting something, they would stop and drill addition. Mm-hmm. I see what's happening in today's schools because I've been in the classroom myself, and we just simply think this new progressive way of education says, you know what, you don't really need to know the basics because you can look them up on this. 5 + 7, you don't really need to know that because you can just look it up on here. Well, that's a huge issue.
Yes.
So it's kind of like with English. We stopped doing spelling. Have you ever heard anybody conjugate a verb improperly in a sentence anymore? I could have ran. That's not a proper word verb in a sentence.
Right.
But we don't do any of the basics. So we don't know how to spell, we don't know how the proper parts of a sentence, but yet we want them to read Tolstoy. I mean, it's kind of the same thing with math. We don't want to teach them addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and make sure they know that before they move on. And I think this goes all the way back to when I was a kid in the school in the 70s. We were just kind of like, oh, brush that off. We really want to make sure you can do the I don't know, something formula, you know. Well, what difference does that make if I can't even figure out what 7 + 3 is in a fast enough amount of time to do something else?
And it kind of goes back a little bit to, and I'm sure you've experienced this. When you hang around long enough, the old stuff comes back around. So the stuff that they threw out later, if you wait a while and you stick with it, they start bringing back what they told you to get rid of. And the word now is automaticity. So it used to be, you know, oh, you don't want the worksheets. You don't want to drill them and kill them. You don't want the rote, like what you're talking about, like the times tables and things like that. But now the buzzword is automaticity. They should be doing all these things with automaticity. Well, how do you do that? How do you develop where you can quickly know your multiplication? How do you do that? I mean, there is an answer to that, and they don't want to hear it. And like you said, when you had your phone a while ago, they used to say in the standards, you know, about technology. And I thought, okay, well, a calculator is a basic form of technology. So perhaps there's a place we can bring this in and for some of these skills kind of speed along the process, not to replace the basic fundamentals. But that's what has happened because now we allow beginning in 6th grade, you can use a calculator on the state assessments. So we've got 6th graders with their calculators doing their state assessment. And if you're solving
7 + 3.
Yes. And they don't even, and I say this, and, you know, people are going to think I'm crazy, and some of my students think I'm crazy. I would almost rather see this because I see that they're counting. I see that they're putting the numbers together. I see that that mental process means I'm combining or I'm counting forward or I'm moving right on the number line. I would rather see this than this punching on the calculator for 2 + 1 or 2 × 1 or 3 × 2.
Well, this at least takes some mental work.
Right.
The monkeys can do this.
Correct. And it also, it's learned helplessness because they don't even give themselves a chance. Occasionally I'll see kids catch themselves. They automatically reach for that calculator, but then they go, oh, well, that's 8. And I'm like, yes, so stop reaching for the calculator. So sometimes kids catch themselves. However, there are still, unless they were removed, and I'm pretty sure they weren't, there are decimal operations like in our textbooks and things. So they're still expected to know how. They're not going to learn that process when you give them a calculator on the test.
They will not.
And then I think that's been misunderstood in some lower grades and by parents. Why do they need to learn their multiplication facts if they have a calculator? Okay, well, come on up to middle school and I'll show you. Because when you ask a room full of middle school kids, give me 2 numbers I can multiply together and get a product of 12.
I thought of 2 really fast.
I mean, it's painful, right? And so they're like, then they pick it up and they're like, oh, wait, you're asking me what I have to punch to get an answer of 12. Yes, hon. What numbers do you have? So they don't get those solid foundational things because they are under the false pretense that I no longer need that skill because the calculator will do it. No, the calculator just processes what you put in. I'm asking you now, you got to know what to put in. And that's where the wheels are coming off. So, but again, if I'm supposed to teach 6th grade skills, we're supposed to already be doing integers and equations and all that other stuff. And you can't tell me that 2 × 6 is 12, that 3 × 4 is 12. I mean, you can't tell me all the factors of 24. They struggle and they struggle and they struggle and they struggle because they think all they have to have is that calculator and their world is fine.
Well, and then there's the
Wow.
other point too that Ken said, which I really loved. And I think, you and I have talked about this specific thing before. Assessments really, honestly, in the state of Oklahoma are stupid because they come at the end of the year. You're expecting, kids to remember all of these things all the way up until the end of the year when you're not even, it's a nightmare. Plus, then the teachers don't get the scores back until later. And then the kids already moved
Mhm.
on. So, really,
Mhm.
what good does that do?
Mhm.
And Ken was talking about the fact that really, honestly, I mean, you and I are both as old as Methuselah. And I remember when I was in, and I got alternatively certified, and we still had to take a class on teaching. And I remember, and assessments. And I remember one of the things, even though I couldn't stand my assessment teacher, I won't go into that. She gave me a C, even though I earned a B, just because I would constantly argue with her in class because she was a feminist, like a deluxe feminist, and she always had to talk men down. And I would like say something, just I can't imagine that me. But yeah. But I remember the one thing she and I did agree with on, if you were to bring the kids into class and in the first week of class, you give them a basic test for what they should know in 7th grade in math or in English or whatever that is. Give them a multiplication, division, basic stuff. What should you know in 7th grade? They take that test. You get the test back because you did it at the beginning of the year. You're not waiting. You get it back. You look at it and you go, oh, wow. So John doesn't know how to do this and Mary doesn't know how to do this. And wow. Okay. So now I kind of know where I am. Then at the end, you give them an exit test. That's the very same test you gave them at the beginning. That is the only way, there is no other way to determine what those kids learned in that year and how far they've come from the beginning.
Yes.
Why can't we do that? What is the world going to end if we were to do that?
Well, what you're talking about, and maybe you'll figure out the error of your ways, you're talking about growth. And I know. So, what's funny to me, and by funny, I mean tragic. I always say Oklahoma education, where seldom is heard an encouraging word. So it's that we say we're measuring for growth. We insist. And there are people at the State Department who have crafted a wonderful explanation to try to convince you that we are. However, when we have the background we have, we've taught kids like we have, we know what we do. Don't tell me I haven't seen what I've seen for 23 years. You're too late. I've already seen it. So, we can take, and especially this applies particularly to special education students. If you have a student who is a 7th grader on a 4th grade math level, at the end of that year, if they are on a 6th grade math level, there's some work that's been done. And it is not going to show on any metric given by our state. And so all we're doing is and again, I know I'm not the one to make it up, but academic trauma, you talk about some kids who think they can't do squat. Oh my goodness. They have trouble even processing the questions. But again, that's why they're in a different class to get different material, yet they do the same assessment. And that has always been mind-blowing to me. So when you get these big conglomerates and they want to say, well, compare us to China and compare us to this country, compare us to that country. I'm sorry, are they educating all? Are they assessing all? Are they putting all of their kids in school and assessing all of their kids? Because that's what we're doing. And that's the picture you're putting up to their probably top 10%, if I had to guess. Because if you're going to take our top 10% and their top 10%, we're going to be right there. But it just is common sense. The more people you include in the sample, the more different that number is going to be. So we're educating all, they're educating some. So anybody who even starts down that road, to me, just does not have any legitimacy at all. Because what we should be testing for is growth. And I think, what you know at the end compared to what you know at the beginning. And it's funny that the textbook thing is coming up, because in every textbook I've ever seen, you know what's in it? A pre-test and a post-test. It's the crazy.
Oh, yes.
So, I mean, I feel like we're buying this curriculum and we just start on page 30, because the first pages were pre-test and post-test. And also there's a Renaissance program that a lot of schools use that uses STAR math tests and STAR reading tests, but I'm more familiar with the math. And it will show you can give a kid a STAR test at the end of every month and see their growth, which makes sense because, for example, in middle school grades, you start out with number line and integers and things and fractions. By the end of the year, you're into your geometry and your equations and things like that. So when you test for algebra in September, it's probably not going to be there. But when you test for algebra in April, it probably will. So, and I think until we start getting to a growth model like that, but that's going to cost money because that's going to be 2 tests per kid. So,
yeah, but see, that's the thing I don't understand. Now, granted, you can have teachers who just literally aren't going to follow the program. And you and I know lots of them, but there are teachers that will. And why are we not just telling teachers, look, take this, here's the test that we want you to give, you give it in class, you grade it, you've got, you can manage it. Because how many times did we give tests and we had to grade them? It's not that hard.
Right.
So you grade them and then you give the one at the end and you grade it and you give it to the principal, which is what we used to do back in the day, right? Because the principal was the grand poobah of the school. So the principal was the one that was supposed to be looking at your lesson plans and coming in and monitoring your classroom. Where are the principals? What are they doing now?
Well, I'm not sure if that is still in their purview. We have outsourced a lot of this process. We have outsourced a lot of our data. And now the key word is, I guess it still is, benchmark. So we just benchmark. Well, I mean, you can weigh the heifer every Tuesday, but that doesn't make her better. I mean, the measuring isn't the problem. You've got to be fixing what needs to be fixed. And I think there's a constant pressure for time because you're thinking, okay, well, this assessment tells me I need to remediate XYZ, but I don't have time to do that because if I stop now to go back, my next benchmark, we're going to be behind. And there's probably some validity to that. And if you'll remember back when they were trying to sell us on Common Core, that was their big selling point, was that we're only going to be learning, not very many things and learning them more deeply. And that's really not how it has panned out. Because I remember one of the things, and I just now thought of this, when they were, again, trying to sell us on Common Core and convince us of its merits, it was like they were assuming every kid was coming in with the necessary foundation.
Right.
That was a huge assumption. I'm like, you can't even do that. You can't do that because there was no room for filling in skill gaps. There was no room for kids who maybe didn't quite get the concept solidified. It was, you are starting with 6th grade. There is no repeat of 5th grade. And now you're moving forward. And then when they get to 7th grade, it was the same thing. There was no back building. There was no assurances of foundation. It was, oh, they're all going to be there because if that teacher below you did their job, then they're all coming to you ready. Have you been in a school? That's just not how it works.
No, and I'm going to actually give you an illustration that will prove you correct. When I was teaching 7th grade science, and we all know that middle school, you and me, we love our middle schoolers. They're great, but they are the squirreliest age ever. They would go in 47 directions at once, and just getting them to focus was like, yes, I did it today. But anyway, I remember when I was teaching 7th grade and they would come in, and the very first year I taught 7th grade, I just started off teaching, the standards and teaching the stuff that the benchmarks, trying to get to the first benchmarks that I was supposed to. Yeah. Well, I noticed, because we were talking about measuring, and we actually had a worksheet that I handed out so that we could all go over different ways of measuring and metric versus English and that kind of thing. And I'm telling you, Sandy, half of the class was like, huh? And I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on? Well, I don't know how to measure with a ruler. What do you mean you're in 7th grade and you don't know how to measure with a ruler? Well, I don't know the difference between English and metric. How can you be in 7th grade and not know So I remember thinking to myself, and we stopped for a week of class and just went over the English and metric system. went over how to use a ruler, went over how to measure different things, because honestly, what was I going to do? Let them go to 8th grade and they still don't know how to use a ruler? I mean, Sandy, oh my gosh, I can't even believe it. But that's exactly what we're doing.
Mhm.
And then we go, why are our English scores and our math scores in the toilet?
Yeah, because we've pushed them on and pushed them on. But again, if you look at the data, and these data crafters, oh my goodness, I mean, it just depends on which page you look at, because on one page, they're going to show you that they don't know their head from a hole in the ground, but on the other page, they're going to show, and they're all ready to go to the next step.
Yes. I'm laughing, but it's not funny. I know, I get, because it's so, but it's so true.
Yeah. And then,
Well,
we get this devastation. And again, I think in middle school, it's kind of a pinch, because that to me is where the transition happens. That to me is where it becomes less concrete. Your material becomes more abstract. And for a kid as a learner, they're not going to say the answer to number 8 is XYZ 12. You're going to have to read it, and you're going to have to put some things together with some understanding. And they need a while to get their bearings in that. And I don't know that the approach that we're taking is really doing that. And then, of course, you mentioned administrators a while ago. I think, just from the research I've done from teachers, a lot of the teachers are not supported by their administrators when these things start to happen. So when parents are saying, my kid has always been, this kind of student, and now it's this, well, they're learning how to learn. And they're learning what to do. They're learning how to think. They're learning how to reason. They're learning how to be logical. And that is not concrete. So there are a lot of involved parties for which that's a tough sell. The kid and the parent and administrator. So as a teacher, this is what the learning is now looking like. But all the other ones are seeing is struggle, and struggle needs to stop, because nothing bad should ever happen. There should never be a struggle. It should always be easy. That's not the life I live. That's not anybody's life. I mean, that's just not realistic. So I think as middle school teachers in particular, because that's where that shift begins to happen, they're kind of in a tough spot. And the curriculum that we're telling them they need to be doing is not helping.
Michael, you wanted to say something.
Well, I just wanted to ask, do you feel, in your opinion, do teachers even have the freedom to kind of assess these kids and kind of go their own route a little bit in the classroom to actually teach them, to get them up to speed? Or are they too inundated with all this other stuff to even be able to do that?
There is the constant pressure and expectation of feeling like your head is in a vice, because it's like you're seizing every moment of every day. Because again, I'm looking at the standards, and to me, that's where that, if we do this, 5 to 10% of states have similar. I think we can have lofty standards. I mean, great. If our kids can't do them, it doesn't matter. And so I would think, if I give a test and half my students pass, I'm going to hesitate to go on. I'm going to say, we don't quite have this if only half of my kids are capable of doing it. And if the next chapter builds on this one and this one's not there, well, how do you expect the next one to go? So again, as far as the teacher perspective, it depends on the district, because there are going to be some districts where the teacher feels autonomous to do that. And by autonomous, I mean, they know that's what is right, but are they allowed to do it? And so when you talk about, this is another show, but teachers fleeing the profession, that's a lot of the reason why, because they know what needs to be done. They know what's right. They see these kids day in and day out. They see these kids struggle. They see these kids fall apart, and they know what needs to be done. And some of them are not given the latitude to do it. And so that's heartbreaking for the teacher and the kid to just sit and watch that, day after day after day. And it just causes teachers to say, no, thanks. I'm out. And maybe parents for kids, like you said, you decided you were done with school. That could be why parents are going, I'm done with school, because I know what my kid needs. My kid knows what they need, and they're not getting it here. We will go elsewhere. So I just think that's a component of part of what we're seeing with these alternatives to public education that are popping up. I think that's part of it. And so it's easy to point the finger at teachers, I think, sometimes. But you got to think, too, that teacher has a manager. Every building has a manager. Every district has a manager. So there is a hierarchy. So a lot of times that conversation with that teacher, if you're the parent, is very telling of what they know, what they think, but what they're allowed to do is sometimes different. And it's heartbreaking, because we went to school for this. and if we went to school for it, we had a passion or a desire to do it in the first place. So we chose it. And then you think you know what you're getting into, but yet when you see everything go against what you know and you're told to do it anyway, there's only so long you can do that and see the results of what's happening to the kids. There's only so long you can live in that world. And the more options that keep popping up and you're like, let's try this instead, because what we're doing now isn't working for anybody.
Well, I didn't want to jump on you again if you had something else. So because we're already at an hour, if we wanted to sum up what we've talked about here, and somebody said, okay, so you talked about this, what is your outcome? What are the things that you would say, this is what we need to do to fix this problem? Do you have a list? I mean, obviously you have a list. We went through them in detail. I mean, but maybe we should go back and kind of, coalesce them in a, kind of here at the end.
Kind of in a perfect world, how would we get the result that we need academically?
There's going to have to be a lot of changes structurally. So beginning with, standards and assessments. And as a parent, you want to keep in contact with that teacher. But then, as you stated, if you communicate, what you think needs to be done and it's not being done, feel free to explore your options. And I know for decades and decades, public school was the only game in town. And you didn't have a lot of options. But now, and especially, since COVID and all kinds of things, there are other options popping up. There are a lot of small towns who are doing co-ops. There are a lot of small towns whose families are meeting together, a couple days a week, and they're doing a blended hybrid of in-person and online. So they're still getting that experience face-to-face, person-to-person with a certified teacher. So a lot of parents are looking into that, and they have some flexibility to do things differently. So to me, again, this is Oklahoma. It's a blessing and a curse because districts are so different. What you get in one district, might be different than what you get in the district, 10 miles down the road, and everything is allowed to be different. And I think local control, that's what's going to happen when you have local control. But I think the more options that parents have, if the structure of, the standards that aren't good, the assessments that aren't good, the pressure we're putting on our teachers, the pressure we're putting on our kids, and why any parent lets their kid take that third grade reading test is beyond me. I don't know why there is not a parent opt-out movement being led down the street like their hair is on fire. Because when you talk about academic trauma, opt your kids out of those stinking tests. Opt your kids out. And all you have to do is tell the school, my kid ain't doing it. I mean, yeah, you put it in writing and don't say ain't, but nevertheless, I mean, you don't have to put your child through that. And think of the evidence you get back from it. There's no benefit. There's absolutely no benefit other than you're putting your kid in that high pressure situation as a third grader. It's completely unnecessary.
But there is a benefit, and let's not forget to inform the public what the benefit is. The benefit is, according to our elementary and secondary education protocol at the federal level, we have to have 98% of all students
participation. Yes, we have to have 95% participation.
Okay, of all kids have to take the test in order for us to get our federal money. Beyond even parents opting out of tests like their hair is on fire, parents should be saying, stop taking federal money like their hair is on fire.
But then kids won't get lunches, Jenny.
Oh, I know. Isn't that a shame? Oh my gosh. And that brings me to a funny story, actually. So like I said early on, Joy Hoffmeister, when she was first in, was allowing me to sit in on some of these meetings and have some voice. And we were she brought me in on some kind of a meeting. I don't even remember what it was, but we were talking about different ways that we could help improve public school. And I, of course, said, we need to get rid of federal funding, at which point everybody in the room looks at me like I have now sprouted 3 heads, like I'm a Gorgon. And who's going to know what that is anymore? Anyway, and yet I digress. And I said, well, no, stop and think about it. Oh, because one person said, but we won't get federal lunches if we don't have federal money. And I said, okay, well, hold on a second. please tell me that there aren't nonprofit organizations out there that you could partner with, like the food bank, to bring in money for school lunches. There aren't farmers out there that you couldn't partner with to bring in school lunches. Why are we just doing the federal money thing and we're not even thinking out of the box?
Right.
And you should have seen everybody. I mean, well, we can't possibly think out of the box. If we thought out of the box, the world would come to an end as we know it. There's no, these people, all they care about is government.
Yes.
That's all they care about. Government is the big deity in the sky, and that's all they care about. And until we get people off the idea that government is the be all end all provider of all things good, I don't think we're going to get anywhere, because they won't even think out of the box as to how we could do something without government control. They just look like a deer in the headlights. What do you mean?
Yeah. And I think there's, at what point are we spending dollars chasing dimes?
Correct.
And at what point, like, what's your price? So you're being, you're harming your child's development. What's your price for doing that? I mean, you walk up to a parent, how much would I have to pay you to hurt your child? Well, apparently whatever the amount of the federal government is going to give your school, because that's what you're doing. So I don't understand that trade-off. And again, as a teacher, I'm like, oh, there's no amount of money. You can't pay me to commit academic malfeasance. You can't. I mean, like, you can't. It's academic malpractice to me. And I don't have a price. Sorry, I don't. So I don't understand why we're just, and a lot of times when you ask why these things are happening, that's the answer you get. Why are we doing these tests? Why are we doing this? Why? And again, our standards, why did we write our standards like we did? Because we were competing for the Race to the Top funds. Well, how did that pan out? So the more dependent you are on someone, then you're at their whim and you're at their mercy. And, some even go so far to use the word enslaved. And I just think when you're begging for that money, you're in a vulnerable position and they know it. So they're going to start dictating what your school does, what you can eat, what you can sell, where you can go to the bathroom, what this has to look like. And I don't think they see that as a trade-off. All they see is the money. They don't see that you're losing your autonomy.
Well, and I'm going to even go one step further too, and just bring in another actual example. During Obama's term, because he was the one who brought in all the Common Core and the Race to the Top and all of that kind of the data collection and all of the things that we know that we fought against at the beginning. Well, the other thing that he did in his second term was he wrote and it's called a letter to colleagues. That's all it is. It's just a letter that's sent out from the president's office, goes through the Secretary of Education, is sent out to all the public schools in the United States. And it's just a letter. Right? And his letter to colleagues in his second administration basically said, you know what, we are finding that Black children and special education students are disproportionately being treated to punishment in the classroom, whatever that is, and we're going to stop that. We cannot continue to disproportionately penalize this group of kids. So basically, teachers were then handcuffed, because if their administrators were told by their administrators that now this letter has come down and you are not allowed to discipline anybody who's Black or anybody who has special education, is on an IEP in your classroom, who's special education. So how many times have we heard teachers say, I'm leaving because I was assaulted by a child in my classroom? Honestly, how many times have we heard? Multiple times. I can't keep my classroom. And these are kids that are affecting the learning of the other kids in the classroom. These other kids in the classroom can't learn if teachers getting assaulted by kids. But then their administrator is saying, no, you can't discipline these kids. This letter to colleagues, that was done during Obama. We've had even Trump since then, for Pete's sakes, and it still was in place. And you were still having that problem. discipline should be completely, like everything should, in my personal opinion, should be completely race free. If you can't behave, you need to be disciplined. I don't care what you look like. You could be purple and have horns growing out of your head. I don't really care. But if you can't behave in the classroom, you are affecting the learning of the other kids in my classroom. And I'm going to tell you to get out.
Yeah.
But I will say that this particular, so I left teaching in 2002. And I remember that last year of 2002, I had a kid whose father was in the administration in my building. And he had been, he'd been great in the first semester. I mean, he was really great. Second semester, he came back like a totally different kid. Would not behave. I could not get him to behave. I would call the office and say, somebody's going to need to come down, or I'm going to send him down because I can't leave my classroom and he's, causing problems. That kid, I finally, one day, and I will never forget this because it so upset me. So the kid was, really causing problems. He would not be quiet. He kept talking over me in class. He would lean back and laugh. Just literally disturbing all of the other kids against and around him. And I said, okay, that's it. We're going to leave the classroom at this point. No, I'm not going to. Well, you're going to need to leave because, you can just go sit in the hall, but we're doing class right now. He would not leave. So I walked over and I put my hand on his shoulder and I said, okay, let's go out. He literally started screaming that I assaulted him, ran out into the hallway, ran down the hallway to where his dad was in the administration and screamed and yelled about it. And I got called on the carpet for trying to keep the kid from creating problems in my classroom.
Right.
Who would stay under those circumstances?
Right. And
who would stay in a classroom under those circumstances?
Correct. And you have to understand too, like we've stated, with that kind of behavior. So I think we could say, the expectation of behavior has gone down as the curriculum requirement has gone up. So we're expecting harder things in a more chaotic environment. And I don't know that anyone wants to sign up for that. There's a certain maturity that has to be there and a certain environment that has to be there to learn hard things. So if you're wanting me to teach hard things, I can do that, but there has to be an environment where that can happen. And a lot of people don't understand that.
Boy, Sandy, if it were between you and me, we would fix everything.
Yeah, we would. We'd fix a lot for sure.
Well, I do think we would, because I think, and that's the saddest thing. I think, the best solution isn't the easiest solution.
Right.
It just simply isn't. We can't just continue to pat kids on the head and say, oh, I'm so sorry that you feel bad and you've had a bad life, do whatever you want. We've got to quit doing that. We've got to start imposing standards of behavior on kids again. We've got to start imposing standards of behavior on teachers again, but then beyond that, on their administrators. And then maybe we could have, we've got to have these standards changed. We've got to have autonomy for teachers in classrooms. All of these things are things that are not happening, which is why we're seeing kids flailing and teachers leaving. And until, people are going to wake up and hear what we have to say. And I know there are a lot of teachers out there going, yes.
Yeah.
But I wish I knew what we could, do other than talk about it, other than get the information out there, where I don't think a lot of parents understand what goes on in the classroom and the problems that teachers have just trying to do their jobs in a day.
Correct. Yeah. And until we get rid of the word standardized, because that's part of the problem is that we put every kid in a box. If you've met a kid, no kid is not like any other kid. So if we try to educate them the same, test them the same, teach them the same, that it doesn't exist. We're not living in reality when we try to do that.
Well, Sandy, we're at 1:14, which is fine. We go over. That's why we have them on our Rumble channel, our YouTube channel. If you can't watch them all the way through, you can go back and rewatch them. Do you have anything that you can kind of, other than that, are there any words of wisdom you can leave us with for today?
This, it hits different people differently, but I would say just right off the bat, don't have an immediate reaction when you hear the term school choice, because I think it gets a bad rap a lot of times. It gets misconstrued, and especially with some of the things that are in the news now, because when you say, options for kids, it comes back, well, every kid is different. And if you have a public school and there is no mechanism for any kind of remediation, there is no mechanism for anything that needs to be reviewed or backtracked or any skill gaps, that's going to be a problem that's only going to get worse. So I think we've got to have options. We've got to have choices. And I think that can be wonderful for kids. It can be wonderful for teachers. It can be wonderful for parents. But I think if you're just believing everything you're being told in the media is true, you're going to have an automatic reflex against the term school choice. But to me, as a parent, I'm not a parent, but if I were a parent, I would want the choice of school for my kid. Like when we get those choice of books, I want to pick the book that suits my style, suits my classroom, suits what I need to do. I want to pick that book, the best one of the choices, if there is one. So I want to think, as a parent, you want those options for your child. So don't have an automatic reaction to school choice. Figure out what it is, learn what it means in your community. Because there's even some choices here in McLean County that weren't here 2 years ago. So do your homework. Do your homework. That's always good advice. And look in your community and nearby places to see what's available, because our kids have to have choices. They've got to. Because you can't re-educate a child. You can re-educate a 15-year-old from an 8-year-old, but you can never go back and re-educate the 8-year-old. They're 8 and now they're not. So it's gone.
Gosh, that's kind of a sad, but good point to end on. Sandy, Dr. Harrell, I wish you would come back at some point and talk with us, because you are just you're the best.
Thank you.
Some
people would disagree with you, but I appreciate you.
I don't really care. You're the best to me.
A lot of people disagree with Jenni.
Well, and I told her a long time ago, I said, you and I can never go anywhere because one of us always has to be out to come bail the other one. So we can we'd have to be careful if we went somewhere together. But yeah, it's our kids are so important. I mean, our education of our kids is so important. And past a certain point, you're educating an adult rather than a child. And that's an altogether different ball of wax. So I think people should just look at their choices and do what is best. And don't be afraid to push back. Don't be afraid, well, it's always been this way, or I don't know anybody else like this. Well, they'll get used to you. I mean, do what you have to do for your kids. They're your kids.
Get used to you.
I mean, yeah, they get used to your tinfoil hat after a while. They learn to like it. So eventually they want one too.
Well, but that's the truth, though. I mean, not only parents have to push back, but teachers are going to have to push back too, because nothing is going to change until teachers stand up and say, you know what, I'm not teaching like that. I'm not going to do that. It's not good for my kids. I'm just not going to do it. I mean, do what you want.
Right. And I wonder, and I'm not as familiar with this as other issues, but I wonder if some of our teacher training has an impact, because I think a lot of them are just told to do what you're told. And anybody can do that. I mean, I don't need to go to college to be told to do what I'm told, which I've never been really good at that anyway. Surprise. But I mean, I think they want scripted. I think they want lockstep, and they want, here's what you're doing day 1, here's what you're doing day 20, here's what you're doing. And surprisingly, I have met some teachers that like that. And I'm like, oh, please go. I mean, because that doesn't give any room for creativity or planning or developing. But there are, in this age of quick technology, there are people who just want it streamlined, and I'll walk in there and read what you want me to read. That's not teaching. That's reading. That's reciting. That's performing. That's not teaching.
Well, and again, it's not doing what you and I have been talking about this whole thing, which is making sure that each kid is able to know what they need to know to move on.
Yeah. And plays to their strengths. I've got so many kids that, they're okay at math, but you should see them draw. I mean, or you should hear them play music. And so much of that is not allowed for and not promoted and not encouraged. And I think that with our standards and with the way we're assessing, we're reading and math focused, and everything else is falling by the wayside. And that is not the way to educate a child.
Well, I think I'm going to tweet this out to our superintendent today and just say, hey, you might like to, check this out and see what you think. Maybe he would agree with this.
I visited with him a couple of times when he was campaigning, and because he came, and I go see a lot of candidates and stuff, and just try to visit with him and meet with them. And so, yeah, he may remember me. I don't know. Sometimes people meet me and block me out because
Sandy. Well, I just think, and this is stuff that you and I have been saying independently and together for 10 years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, all you need to do is go back to our original blog and you'll see all that stuff about the standards and all the, stuff that we've been talking about. But until somebody reads it, listens to it, and decides to do something about it, we are where we are. 50% of kids. That's what we're expecting.
That's our grand goal. And I keep thinking, Dr. Phil, how's that working for you? I mean, how are we doing? Have we really taken off since are we experiencing mass success that I don't know about? I mean, where are we?
And how do you get better by requiring less?
Oh, wow.
How do you get better? By requiring less. I know that's kind of a brain freak, but
for sure.
Hey. All right. Well, Sandy, we will be in touch because,
sure.
Anytime you've got something that you want to talk to us about, you always have time with us.
Thank you.
We just
so
love
much.
you. And again, many congratulations on your doctorate.
I'm trying to re-enter life.
Yeah, I know. It's weird, isn't it?
Yes.
And it's sad because I kind of miss it now and want to go back. And I'm like, stop.
Yeah. When I find something, I'm like, ooh, maybe I can research that. Back down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, Sandy, God love you. Thank you so much for being with us. And we will hope to hear from you again soon.
Yes. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right. All the best.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Dr. Harrell.
Oh, she's the best. She is. She's the best. I just love Sandy Harrell. I just think she's the best. And you'd be hard pressed to get me to say anything different. She's just the best.
Yeah. Well, and you know what? It's people like Dr. Harrell that have all of that veteran experience about how to really teach, how you really get kids to learn and grow. I mean, she said it herself. There's no growth in this process that we're in today. And I hate to say it, Jenny, but it always comes down to my subject, which is money. I mean, money's in the school districts. Money's dictating what's happening within the walls of these buildings. And you have to look at it in terms of investment. I mean, are you going to invest in something that you're not going to get a return on? I mean, are you going to spend your money on some type of investment on a rental property, something like that all you're going to do is just waste money and it's going to cost you more and more and you're never going to have a productive result in that investment? I mean,
to even do what Sandy was saying, are you going to invest something where you're only going to get half of your investment back?
Yeah, and that's on the good side. That's where they're wanting to go. We please get to half. I mean, how sad is that that's the state of our education when, we talk about with the whole MAGA movement and all this stuff, American excellence. Yes, we were the best in the world. Rewind 40, 50, 60 years ago, we were the best in the world. Now we've got all these social issues, but academics is a complete backseat. There's no more academics in school unless a teacher takes it on themselves and goes outside of the system to assess each one of these kids and to do whatever they can do to try to get a kid to a better place. But 50% is absolutely, I mean, I'll just put it in another example. There's nothing else outside of education in the United States where we literally go backwards. You look at technology, you expect your phone to be better than it was 5 or 10 years ago. You expect your car to be safer, to have more value to it. Is your home going backwards in price? No, your home is going up in price. Everything that we have to have materially, all we expect better. We expect excellence in all of those things except education. Education is going the other direction.
Well, it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it, a little bit, that isn't planned?
Yeah.
Because, I made the kind of offhand snarky comment to Sandy about, the movie Idiocracy when she said the 50% thing. But that's not a joke. If you haven't seen the movie Idiocracy, and you need to see it. It was created by Mike Judge, who's the same guy who did, what was the guy from Texas?
King of the Hill.
King of the Hill. He did King of the Hill. And if you watch that movie, if you don't see parallels that are happening today, just right in front of your face, then you're too blind to see. I mean, you shouldn't even be driving because you're like, almost visually blind.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's really honestly the truth. And for, for us to be going backward, I almost think is planned obsolescence, because the dumber we are, the less we're willing to push back. The dumber we
Yeah.
are, the more sheeple we become. The dumber
Yeah.
we are, the more easily led we are. And I just think it is the way it is. So parents out there, if you really want your kid to amount to something, to succeed beyond the measly 50% that we are expecting of them right now, like Sandy said, you're going to have to get involved and provide some choices for them. And Oklahoma has one of the largest amount of choice for education in all other states. And let's not forget, although I know there are people out there rolling their eyes, homeschooling is 100% unfettered in Oklahoma right now. My neighbor has moved here from California just to make sure that she can homeschool her kids the way she wants to do it. So, and homeschooling today, we've had so many homeschoolers who have been on this program who have told you over and over again, this is a doable thing. It's not like it used to be. You can get curriculum online if you feel. We've had the director of classical education or classical conversations come on and talk about that program. I mean, it is available to do, but I will say this, and then we're going to have to probably wind it down. The majority of kids are always going to be educated by public education, because unfortunately the majority of parents are not really all that interested in whether or not their kids succeed, so much as they're just trying to get through the day, or conversely, they just don't care because they've got their own life going on. So we have to have a public education system. If that's what we're going to agree to, I would rather get rid of it. If you want to know the truth, I would rather just get rid of public education, put the onus back on parents. And I think that would 100% stop so much of the disgusting behavior that we're seeing today, if parents just had to take responsibility for their kids. But then on the other hand, so let's say we have it, and we have it, it needs to function. It has to function. And the way it's functioning right now isn't functioning. It's just going backwards.
Yeah.
So, all right. That being said, we have a really exciting. Oh, do you have anything before I move on?
No, because if I get going, I mean, we're going to talk for another 30 minutes.
Yeah, well, we probably shouldn't today. But I do want to mention we have Janelle and Kevin Batts on Friday. You guys have seen Janelle on our show before. Janelle is, again, these are fabulous people that I love very much. And Kevin and Janelle have started their own production company, and they completed their first documentary called Saving Clayton, about the Woolley family in the Tulsa area who had their grandson taken away from them by DHS and who has still not been returned. They have done that one and completed that one, and they're now getting ready to complete their next documentary called Dead Name, about detransitioners in Oklahoma. And if you don't think that's an issue here, you've got to tune in on Friday at 9 a.m. to talk to Kevin and Janelle. Again, you can chat with us on our live chat on our Rumble channel. You can live chat with us on Facebook. And we're happy to chat along with you. But be present 9 a.m. Friday morning live for Kevin and Janelle Batts, and they'll talk to us about their new documentary.
Yeah, can't wait.
All right. Anything else?
No, that's it. We've got to take responsibility for our kids and their education, as always. Can't just put it onto the system, put it just onto the teachers. We've got to be a major part in taking responsibility there too, as parents.
Absolutely.
And the community.
Absolutely.
So.
Well, Michael, it was good to be on with you again today, and I'm looking forward to seeing you on Friday with Kevin and Janelle. And everybody, please tune back in on Friday, and we'll see you then.